Hello to those of you who have already dialed in. We're just waiting for a few more participants who have logged in and are just coming on board. So just bear with us and we will start in 1 or 2 minutes. Thank you. All right. So, hi everyone. I'm Karen Abraham, the chair of AIPPI's Standing Committee on Intellectual Property, Genetic Resources, and Traditional Knowledge. Welcome to our AIPPI webinar entitled Approaching TK Through the Lens of New Technologies. And of course, we will be dealing with AI together with data sovereignty. Today, our panel of international experts will explore how IP systems can protect Indigenous knowledge, ensure data sovereignty, and give Indigenous peoples and local communities true agency over their culture and data in the age of generative AI. So before we begin, I just have a few housekeeping reminders. Please be reminded that today's session is being recorded, and the recording will be made available to all of you on AIPPI's official YouTube channel. There is also a Q&A box for you to enter all your questions that you have for the panelists, which we will take at the end of the presentations. Finally, at the end of our session, there will be a little brief survey popping up on your screen. Please do take the time to fill that in so that we can receive your feedback and improve our future events and presentations. So thank you very much for joining us today. Ladies and gentlemen, the expansion of AI technologies has intensified both opportunities and risks in our world today and in the world of traditional knowledge. There is no exception. On the one hand, AI can support the revitalization of endangered languages, the documentation of cultural heritage, and the strengthening of environmental stewardship practices. On the other hand, without proper safeguards, AI systems may appropriate, misinterpret, or commercially exploit traditional knowledge without the free, prior, and informed consent of its custodians. This raises fundamental concerns about who controls data, who benefits from its use, and how cultural integrity can be preserved in these digital environments that we find ourselves in. Now, turning to artificial intelligence, AI is rapidly transforming how knowledge is collected, processed, and applied. Relying heavily on large data sets to generate insights and predictions. At the same time, traditional knowledge developed and sustained over generations by Indigenous people and local communities represent deeply rooted systems of cultural, ecological, and scientific understanding. As these two knowledge systems increasingly intersect, critical issues emerge, including data sovereignty and data governance. The intersection that we are seeing between AI and traditional knowledge is an important subject being studied by AIPPI's Standing Committee on IP GRTK. We will be deliberating upon this at our cafe session in Hamburg later in October. The intersection raises profound legal, ethical and policy questions. Who has the right to determine whether TK may be used to train AI systems? How can Indigenous communities maintain agency over knowledge that is collective, culturally significant, and sometimes sacred? And the big question for us in the IP world is, can existing IP frameworks adequately address the use of TK in AI development? Or is a new governance model required? These are questions that go beyond ownership. They concern respect, equity, cultural integrity, and the recognition of Indigenous peoples and local communities as custodians of knowledge rather than merely sources of data. So our first speaker today is Wen Wenlin. Wen has more than 30 years experience in IP in both the public and private sectors. He was the director of the World Intellectual Property Organization, WIPO, for many years until his recent retirement in 2025. He was the secretary of the WIPO Intergovernmental Committee on IP, GR, and Folklore, the IGC, and he is also the author of the publication, The Journey to the WIPO Treaty on Genetic Resources and Traditional Knowledge, Policy, Process, and People. Wend is currently a senior fellow of the Geneva Center on Knowledge Governance at the Graduate Institute in Geneva, and is also an adjunct professor, Faculty of Law at the University of Cape Town, South Africa. So welcome, Wend. When we delve into this topic that we have chosen today, we really need to fully understand the international legal landscape, including WIPO and the impact of the landmark May 2024 Treaty on IPGR and associated TK, and also how other international institutions are tackling the intersection on emerging technologies and Indigenous data sovereignty. Can you please share with us, from your knowledge, experience, the insights on this legal landscape and this shifting space that we are seeing? Over to you, Wend.
Thank you, AIPPI, and to you, Karen, for the invitation, and I'm very happy to join you. As requested, I'm going to complement your excellent introduction, Karen, by briefly setting the scene, by providing some global framing for the topic that the three speakers will delve into in more detail. AIPPI has already run several webinars on IP, TK, TCEs, GRs, but in selecting the topic for this webinar, we looked at the IP-TK field through a wide angle lens, and identified the more recent high-level transformations and shifts that now shape and underrun the global discourse on IP and TK-TCEs. There is, as you've mentioned, for example, the adoption of the landmark WIPO GRTK Treaty in May 2024, increasing references to TK in bilateral and regional free trade agreements, and at the IGC in WIPO, which you've mentioned, the IGC being the forum which is working towards an international legal instrument or instruments on the protection of TK and TCEs. It's now operating since the beginning of this year under a slightly improved mandate and under a new chair, Lane Fisher from New Zealand. But the shift that we felt that is fundamentally changing the weather and that generates the kinds of profoundly unsettling questions that defy established normative frameworks and governance structures and jeopardize Indigenous peoples' aspirations and the emerging new standards that we are seeing in the TK field is new technology, especially AI and the rapid scaling up of the extraction, use, and sharing of data and related Indigenous claims to Indigenous data sovereignty. Now, the audience would be right in saying, but new technology there's nothing new about that. It has been disrupting IP for decades. And that's completely right. Photocopying, cassette tapes and home recording, the internet, peer-to-peer file sharing, each forced a fundamental rethink of how works are protected and monetized. And yet over time, the IP system and business models evolved. From that perspective, AI is simply the latest chapter in this continuing story of disruption and legal evolution. I'm no expert in AI, but it does seem to me to be different as compared with what came before, different in scale, speed, and impact. We've always known that the machines are coming for us, but I think what AI changes is that these machines can now think for themselves. They are thinking machines. And I'm someone deeply interested in knowledge governance, in IP, someone invested in the fair and balanced protection of intangible cultural heritage, TKTCEs. And as a writer and published author, AI both thrills and terrifies me. I can see the promise and I can see the peril. Moving on to the next slide, AIPPI is aware that AI and data are, of course, being discussed in multiple forums, global forums, some of which are listed on the slide. The UN in general, as well as the ITU and UNESCO, are active, and on indigenous issues, the Permanent Forum and MRIP are very active too. MRIP held a workshop on this topic just a few weeks ago in July here in Geneva. On IP in particular, IP principles in particular, at WIPO, where I used to work, allow me to plug the first global forum on IP and AI that will be taking place at WIPO headquarters on November 9 and 10, which I encourage you all to attend. This is the first time AIPPI is hosting a discussion on this topic. It's a general exchange of ideas, as Karen has mentioned. The three speakers will dig deeper into the detail. They will unpack the issues, give real-world examples, and report on what is already being done in three countries, Australia, New Zealand, and Uganda. And I'm very much looking forward to listening to them and to learning from them. I assure you, I know them all. They are each unique, expert human beings, not likely to be replaced by AI anytime soon. I'll be listening especially closely for their recommendations on what concrete actions, if any, should be taken. What should Indigenous peoples do? What should governments do? International organizations like WIPO, the ITU, UNESCO, the UN, technology companies, and the research world do to help Indigenous peoples both mitigate the risks of these new technologies and to benefit from their opportunities. And I'm very happy to hear that this topic, IP, TK, and AI, is on the agenda at AIPPI's upcoming meeting in Hamburg. And I hope that'll be an opportunity to take this discussion forward and look at concrete actions. With that, thank you very much, and I pass the floor back to you, Karen.
Thank you very much, Wen, for providing us with that overview. And we can see that there is much to be done, and this conversation is a continuous one in this evolving space. So we are going to watch that space in terms of what happens at this high level, deliberations on this subject. Thank you very much. So next we have Linnell Tufaria Huria and Tufari Huria, apologies. And Linnell is recognized as the first Maori patent attorney. She is a partner at Kahui Legal, practicing in legal intellectual property. Now, Linnell has had 30 years experience as a commercial lawyer, and she's regarded as one of New Zealand's leading experts on Indigenous intellectual property law in New Zealand and the Pacific. She is a past chair of the Indigenous Rights Committee for the INTA, the International Trademark Association. Welcome, Linnell. Linnell, New Zealand has been in the forefront of an advanced, progressive legal landscape to tackle the misuse of traditional knowledge, cultural expressions, and genetic resources. So, can you share with us some key characteristics of New Zealand's robust Indigenous frameworks, including those to tackle AI and data governance while respecting these collective Indigenous rights? Over to you, Linnell.
Thank you, Karen. O tira tēnā koe, o tira tēnā koutou katoa. He pai ki te tū I runga I tēnei rōpū e mihi atu ana ki a koutou katoa. Ngā kai kōrero o te pōnei. O tira ki a koutou e mātakitaki mai nei. Me o koutou, me o ngā tangata whenua o koutou whenua, ki ngā mate ko whetūrangitia, moi mai rā, rātou ki a rātou, huri noa ki a tātou te hunga ora, tēnā tātou. Ko la nau tawhi huri a tōku ingoa, he uri ahau no Ngāti Ruanui, Ngā Ruahine Rangi, Ngā Rauru ki tahi. Just to quickly translate that, just a quick greetings to all of you tonight, to the Indigenous peoples of the lands that you are currently residing on, to those who have passed on, and to those who are here tonight. Just a special welcome to you all from Aotearoa, New Zealand. So Karen, to your question, I think it's important to consider some of the issues that AI or digital technologies and AI are creating for Indigenous peoples. And these two examples that are on the screen here, the first one is an NFT. That craze was a big fad a few years ago, but it's kind of fallen out of favor these days. But there was a lot of Indigenous imagery being generated through that NFT forum and being sold for significant amounts of money without being returned back to Indigenous peoples. We've seen facial recognition technology. This is a headline from an article in Aotearoa, New Zealand, just explaining how these tools are one of the most racist weapons in the police arsenal, and that's a new technology. If we go to the next slide, then we'll see another example of the top picture is the original photo, and then the bottom photo is the AI generated or the photoshopped as it was previously known, but a changed image where the original man, his head has been removed, which is obviously culturally offensive. And then this work was then reused to promote a religious group, in fact, and the work that they were doing. As a consequence of this misuse, there was actually quite a significant cultural dispute resolution process that was filed, and they were able to settle this dispute. But it just shows the ability of these tools to kind of have complete disregard for what are cultural values that we hold very dear, and enable misappropriation and misuse of our images, our culture, and our heritage. There have been within New Zealand, there has been established what we call the Waitangi Tribunal, which is a forum where Māori can take claims against the Crown for breaches of the Treaty of Waitangi, which is one of the founding documents in Aotearoa. And the reason I mention that forum is there are two really significant claims that I just wish to briefly talk about, which touch on this area of intellectual property and also data. So if we can go to the next slide, please. The first claim that was filed at the Waitangi Tribunal was the Y262 claim. And this claim considered, or one of the claims made in the claim was that the Crown had agreed to various international agreements and obligations that affected Indigenous flora and fauna and the intellectual property rights and rights to other taonga or treasures is what we call them. And some of the recommendations in the Y262 report recommended a number of changes to our intellectual property regimes, but in particular, it talked about the intellectual property laws being unable to protect the relationship that Māori had, or what we call kaitiaki rights and interests between with their taonga or with their cultural heritage. And so the intellectual property rights, whilst it could protect aspects of that knowledge or mātauranga Māori or Māori knowledge, but that was not sufficient to enable that knowledge to flourish. And the Crown, the report recommended that the Crown needed to ensure that mātauranga Māori or Māori knowledge needed to flourish, and therefore other structures and regimes need to be established to enable that to happen. So the importance of this claim is it talks about Māori having really strong relationships with taonga, and this is reflected in Indigenous peoples around the world. Māori with their cultural heritage, and so the Crown really needed to look at other structures. The intellectual property frameworks were not enough. We needed other structures. Unfortunately, those other structures have not yet been established in Aotearoa, New Zealand, but there have been some changes made to our intellectual property framework. I'm not going to touch on those right now, but I would like to talk about the second report, which was on the next slide, please. It's the Y2522 claim, and this was a claim about the CPTPP agreement, or at the time it was the TPPA agreement, and that this was another international agreement that where we were signing up to a digital trade chapter, which was going to adversely impact on Māori ability to control the use of taonga within those digital frameworks. And that's a very simplistic summary of the claim, because it was much more complex than that. But in relation to the topic that we're about to talk about, some of the recommendations in this report talked about the fact that data can incorporate what we call mātauranga Māori or Māori knowledge, and therefore when that mātauranga Māori is incorporated into that data, it becomes Māori data, and this Māori data is a taonga or a treasure. And this Māori data will exist within these digital ecosystems or these digital trade regimes. And so, when they exist in those regimes, they have what we call mauri, life force, they have mana, prestige, and they have genealogy or whakapapa. And when this data is encompassed within these digital ecosystems, it still invokes these obligations on the Crown to actively protect that treasure or that taonga. So I guess the summary here is that this claim and the recommendations that came out of the Waitangi Tribunal imposed obligations on the government to ensure that when Māori data was being dispersed within these digital systems, that the Crown actually had obligations to make sure that that data was being protected. And so if we think about those obligations being on the Crown to actively protect that data, we can now move to the next slide, and I'll talk about some of the processes that have been developed within New Zealand about how to do that. So I mentioned on the previous slide, I talked about Māori data, but if we think about Indigenous data, It really is quite broad. It's being defined around the world in this way. It's considered to be data, information and knowledge that is digital or digitizable, that is about, from or connected to Indigenous peoples, their languages, their cultures, their resources and their environments. So it's very, very broad and can encapsulate basically anything to do with Indigenous peoples. So if we think about that data when it's within a digital world or within an AI system, what structures do we then need to put in place to create this space where that data is being actively protected? If we can go to the next slide, please. And this is where Indigenous data sovereignty comes in, and Karen and we have already referred to this term, which is well accepted around the world as a tool by which we can ensure that Indigenous data and Māori data, in the case of Aotearoa New Zealand, is protected. And Indigenous data sovereignty is really about the inherent rights and interests of Indigenous peoples to be able to govern the collection, ownership and application of Indigenous data, whether that Indigenous data is individual data about a specific person or collective data about a group of Indigenous peoples. If we go to the next slide, so we have Indigenous data sovereignty and that definition. And if we think about how do we develop, how do we progress Indigenous data sovereignty? And so Te Manararonga has come up with these 6 principles to inform how you might engage with Indigenous data sovereignty, or how you can ensure that Indigenous peoples have control over their data. So the first one is what we call rangatiratanga, or authority. Indigenous peoples, and I'll stick to speaking about Māori, but Māori having an inherent right to exercise control over Māori data and Māori data ecosystem. For whakapapa, which is literally translates as like genealogical connections, but in this circumstance it's been associated with or translated as relationships. And what this principle requires is that the systems recognise that all data has whakapapa, or genealogy, and accurate metadata should at a minimum provide information about the provenance of the data, the purposes for the collection of that data, the context of its collection, and the parties involved. The third principle is whanaungatanga, or obligations, and this is really about balancing rights. So we have individual rights, including privacy rights, risks and benefits in relation to data, need to be balanced with those of the groups of which they are a part. In some contexts, collective Māori rights will prevail over those individual rights. The fourth principle is kotahitanga, or collective benefit. And data ecosystems shall be designed and function in ways that enable Māori to derive individual and collective benefit from the use of their data. Manaakitanga, or reciprocity, essentially means respect. The collection, use and interpretation of data shall uphold the dignity of Māori communities, groups and individuals. Data analysis that stigmatizes or blames Māori can result in collective and individual harm and should be actively avoided. And then lastly, kaitiakitanga, which was just recently voted as the most beautiful word in the world, which means guardianship, stewardship, all of those responsibilities. And Māori data should be stored and transferred in such a way that it enables and reinforces the capacity of Māori to exercise their rights of kaitiakitanga, or guardianship, over that Māori data. So those are the principles that should underpin any Indigenous sovereignty, data sovereignty. At the same time, in New Zealand, there's also been a lot of work done on developing an Indigenous data governance framework. And when we're talking about Indigenous data governance, we're talking about the processes, the practices, the standards and policies that are in place and also enable Indigenous people to have control over that Indigenous data. So the data governance model that has been developed in New Zealand by Te Kāhui Raronga, if we go to the next slide, has this vision and this whakatauki tuia te korowai o Hini Raronga, ensuring that data is for self-determination for Indigenous peoples. And what does that mean? What does the governance model need to look like? The next couple of slides sort of delve into some of the values that have to underpin the governance model, and also some of the pillars that inform that governance model. So if we go to the next slide, the Māori data governance model has these relatively intuitive values, and they're fairly self-explanatory. Nurture data as a taonga. So as I've already talked about, we need to ensure that data, and in particular Indigenous data, is looked after as if it is a treasure. We need to ensure that the data is used for good. We need to ensure that the data is used to tell good stories about Māori, about Indigenous peoples, because we have always traditionally heard a lot about the bad stories about Indigenous peoples. We need to ensure that iwi Māori or Indigenous data is put into Indigenous hands or iwi Māori hands in this example. The use of that data needs to be accountable, so it's not a free-for-all. There are responsibilities and obligations that go along with using Māori data, and you need to be accountable for that. And we also need to decolonise data ecosystems, ensure that Māori and Indigenous peoples around the world have access to those ecosystems. And then my last slide is just sort of building on those values, some of the sort of practical ways in which governments around the world can implement a Māori data or Indigenous data governance model is by looking at addressing some of the inequities found in these aspects of the data ecosystem. So ensuring that there is equal or equitable access to workforce development, and that the capacities and capabilities, excuse me, within the Indigenous communities, there's equal access to those opportunities. We need to ensure that there is data infrastructure that supports Indigenous viewpoints, that supports Indigenous peoples having access to a data infrastructure to be able to store, to be able to use, collect, and access their data. Data collection, there needs to be rules and strict guidance around how data is collected. Going back to that point about being accountable, ensuring that you have the free, prior, and informed consent that Karen talked about at the start of this webinar. We need to ensure that data is protected as a taonga, as a treasure. We need to ensure that Indigenous peoples have access, are able to access their data, they're able to share their data in the way that they wish, and that data will be repatriated when it is appropriate to do so. Ensure that data use and reuse is consistent with the values we talked about, ensuring that data is used for good, ensuring that is put into Indigenous people's hands. Make sure that the data is of good quality, and that the system has integrity. As mentioned, there's been times where data has not reflected has reflected a particular narrative about Indigenous peoples, and those sort of narratives need to change, and ensuring the data is accurate and has integrity will go some way to achieving that. And then lastly, ensuring that classification of data is consistent with the Māori value system or an Indigenous value system. And then if we do all these things, and my last slide, you can go to that again now, is examples of, and some of these are a few years old now, but where we can achieve safe practices, where Indigenous values have informed the development of AI programs, and we've achieved some really great outcomes. So it is possible. We just need to have the courage to try a different way of looking at how AI operates and how our digital ecosystems are developed. Tēnā koutou.
Thank you so much, Linnell. That was a really wonderful overview of the infrastructure in New Zealand, and it's amazing how much has already been done in terms of coming up with data governance models and data sovereignty principles, and really looking out at those very crucial elements on the preservation of those rights as AI intersects with the cultural expressions and genetic resources of the Indigenous peoples and the Maoris. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. And now we move to our next speaker, who is Dr. Anthony Kakuza. Welcome, Dr. Anthony. Thank you for joining us today. Dr. Anthony is a Ugandan intellectual property law advocate. He is, of course, at Bianca Kihika and Co. Advocates, I hope I pronounced that correctly, where he oversees the firm's intellectual property practice. He is a visiting professor teaching intellectual property law in folklore and traditional knowledge at the University of Illinois in the United States. He also undertakes intellectual property consultancies for the Africa Regional Intellectual Property Organization, ARIPO, and the World Intellectual Property Organization, WIPO. Dr. Anthony was a WIPO consultant in drafting the traditional knowledge and folklore action plans for Uganda and Malawi. He recently advised the Ugandan government in its TK documentation process. So thank you, Tony, for joining us today. And could you please share with us the current era of TK documentation, and the critical importance in involving custodial communities? How do we protect and preserve the sacred and secret knowledge whilst navigating through AI-related risks and hallucinations? And of course, we look forward to you sharing with us from the African context as well. So thank you, Tony.
Well, thank you very much, Karen, for having me here. And I thank AIPPI for this consideration of being such a part of a wonderful panel. So quickly getting to your question, Africa is quite a diverse continent that has a multiplicity of indigenous communities. And when we look at the fact that there are many indigenous communities within the whole continent, and the direction we're taking in appreciating intellectual property today, there's a lot that the intellectual property can pick from. It picks from the existing cultural heritage around us. And with that cultural heritage, the regulatory landscape is quite lucid in the sense that there are hardly any countries within Africa that have specific legislation that touches on traditional knowledge and cultural expressions. So much as we are a continent that is appreciative of technological developments, there is a need to handle appropriation of traditional knowledge and cultural expressions in the right way, giving credence to the communities where this comes from, and enabling them to also exercise free and prior informed consent before such knowledge and expressions can be utilized. So that's where the documentation journey begins. First of all, understanding what is the, in terms of our cultural diversity as a continent, what do we have that we can call our traditional knowledge? What do we have within our communities that we can refer to as our cultural expressions and our genetic resources in that regard? So the documentation starts from understanding, articulating where it comes from, and placing it within the perspective of different communities so that they will then have a say as to how this can be documented. The easier documentation, of course, in the era that we're in now is using artificial intelligence. And it comes with advantages, of course, but there are also disadvantages if it's poorly utilized. So from, again, the African perspective, we have seen, as I'll be talking into it, that it's best to lean towards defensive protection as opposed to positive protection, that the communities within the respective countries would rather be keeping a hold of what they term as their cultural heritage and determining how this can be utilized and involved in the whole process of documentation. So yes, thank you for passing on the next slide. So what I was trying to say, again, when you look at the current slide, is appreciating the fact that, yes, we have over 3,000 ethnic communities within the African continent. Now try and think about each of these communities having a say in terms of how they would want their cultural heritage documented, how they would want anyone to access and utilize their traditional knowledge and cultural expressions. Many of these communities are split up between different boundaries that make up the countries that they come from. And yet they are the same communities, only split up by boundaries that were created by their colonial masters. So that makes it more important to have a regulatory system in place to determine how they document their traditional knowledge and cultural expressions. So if we move on to the next slide, what we are seeing is that there are currently 3 countries within Africa that have started the journey way back from 2016 on regulating how one can utilize the traditional knowledge and cultural expressions of those specific countries. Kenya and Zambia both came up with legislation in 2016. South Africa followed 3 years later in 2019 with specific legislation. And interestingly, all 3 countries have the unique type, or what you call a sui generis legislation, on the utilization of their cultural expressions and traditional knowledge. Ghana is in the process of finalizing its own legislation on the utilization of cultural expressions and traditional knowledge. So moving on to the next slide, what we also have to appreciate is that documentation, especially in an era of AI, has to understand the differences or the trajectory from what we would call genetic resources, traditional knowledge associated with genetic resources, or maybe even cultural expressions. For the genetic resources, of course, we know that these are what is out there in the wild, what is nature. But when you pick from the actual value or the potential value of what is out there in nature, and you conjoin it together, then you're applying the knowledge that is probably coming from your forefathers to achieve the specific purpose. And that is the aspect that we know as traditional knowledge associated with genetic resources. Now, where you, excuse me, where you actually lack a regulatory landscape on how to utilize or even how to document such information, that is where we've been having certain players, including the big pharma industries, coming in to tap into such knowledge, realizing that there's no regulatory landscape in the use of such knowledge, and then developing products that are patented. Now, if you move on to the next slide, because documentation is necessary and because you need to appreciate cultural heritage as you document, the use of AI becomes even more important how it comes in. So for instance, let's look at specific examples where traditional knowledge associated with genetic resources has been picked out. Uganda, for instance, has a specific tree. The biological name is Wabugia ugandensis, which only grows in specific parts of the country. It has benefits in the treatment of pneumonia, malaria, and bacterial infections. In fact, it has been used in treating COVID. During the COVID pandemic, there's a specific scientist who picked from this tree and developed a herbal product on it. A few of the examples that I can project, as you see in the next slide, we find that when you decide to document without understanding the challenges or the different benefits that can materialize from TK documentation, you may end up in the wrong direction. The cultural devaluation, for instance, comes from instance where, like I said earlier, that there's no specific mechanism or strategic regulatory direction with packaging of traditional knowledge. When you have open access, then you have uncontrolled use and misappropriation, both by people within the specific communities where this knowledge is based, as well as outsiders who totally have no understanding of the cultural direction of the heritage. And then, of course, you have non-documentation of traditional knowledge that's associated with genetic resources. If this is, of course, also poorly handled, then you have a gradual loss or devaluation of the cultural heritage. Where you have also outsiders, like I mentioned earlier, or people that are foreign to specific communities, coming in and working on their own without involving indigenous communities or without observing cultural norms in the utilization of traditional knowledge and cultural expressions, then of course, apart from the fact that there will not be any specific access and benefit sharing mechanisms at play, that can also be an example or a pathway to devaluation or poor use of cultural heritage. Moving on to the next slide, what we need to understand is specific considerations, therefore, in the documentation process. To address the cultural stagnation or the cultural erosion that I've talked about, first of all, we need to understand that, yes, we want to avoid misappropriation, but not every aspect of traditional knowledge or cultural expressions needs to be documented. There are certain parts of it that are sacred to these communities, even within particular clusters of communities that not every member would be open to using specific, maybe traditional medicinal knowledge practices, for instance. And then there are also those that are secret. So this has to be appreciated when we are trying to especially use artificial intelligence in the process of documentation. Then there are ways that we can mitigate the whole process of documentation, because as you document, IP rises, because who is documenting? What are the considerations at play that if I'm documenting cultural expressions, for instance, I may be looked at as the copyright holder of what I document. So there has to be a balance between my interest as the person who is doing the documentation, regardless of what tools I'm using, and the community that has allowed me access to document their work. To mitigate something of that nature, I'll probably need to work with community members, especially those who may have a thorough appreciation of how the whole AI system works. Because if I'm using AI during and after documentation, yes, it can be faster, it can be more accurate, but it can also create a process where this now goes out into data sets that will give way to text and data mining, and most of this information going out into the open will probably allow for biopiracy, for instance. and may even give way to hallucinations when someone is probably doing research on particular documentation processes. So moving on, we find that with these opportunities and considerations, we need to use databases and AI information systems, yes, because they make the job easier. Say, for instance, for patent examiners and IP registrars, they ensure compliance with the patent disclosure requirements. We mentioned earlier through Wen's presentation that we have the 2024 WIPO Treaty that is advocating for patent disclosure requirements. So this can be a simplified process when you're using new technologies in the documentation process. It's also helpful in managing of IP issues in access and benefit sharing and prior informed consent agreements, which definitely benefits the communities out there because you have more structured documentation and better access to a properly organized data set. And it can improve on methods of classification in the patent system, as well as probably in the long run, trademark system and the like. And like I said, helps with examination of patent applications. Next slide. I think that's the summation of it. So thank you. Yes, and that's to wrap things up. I'm just wanting to understand that balance between using technological systems in the traditional knowledge documentation process and the risks that it may create. These need to be mitigated. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Anthony. That was there are a lot of issues for us to consider. It's a balancing act. As much as we want to collate that documentation, the misuse, misinterpretation, and that is why data sovereignty and governance is critical, and also identifying the beneficiaries, the custodians, and so on. So thank you very much for sharing and giving us that overview on the African perspective. Now we move to our final speaker. And before I hand over to Joanne, I just wanted to remind everyone, after Joanne gives her presentation, we will be taking questions. So please put any questions that you have for any of the panelists in the Q&A box. Just click on the Q&A chat and enter your questions there. So welcome, Joanne. Joanne is a descendant of the Koa and Kuku-Yalanji people, being the first peoples of Australia. She combines a 30-year professional career as both an artist, specifically a photographer, and a specialized arts worker. Her work focuses on the fundamentals that assist Aboriginals and Torres Strait Island artists with protective mechanisms for TCE, traditional cultural expression, and traditional knowledge, which are often featured throughout the visual arts industry. In that role, she was involved in the Indigenous caucus participation at the WIPO General Assembly from 2022 to 2024, and was also involved in the WIPO Treaty that we have been talking about, the May 2024 Treaty on IPGR and ATK. She is currently with the Indigenous Art Code as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Engagement and Artist Membership Coordinator. In her role, she provides support towards fair, transparent, and ethical trade with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island visual artists. So, Joanne, we are eager to hear from you on speaking from a grassroots Australian perspective, protecting Aboriginal artists' rights across art centres generally, and how AI has now come into this space and digital technology has impacted authors and composers and the Indigenous community. We look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, Karen, and thank you for the invitation to be on this platform. I want to firstly acknowledge my old people and that I'm connecting to you all from Yagara and Turrbal people in the Brisbane area of Queensland on the East Coast. I am also, as you said, a Kawa and Cook Yellenji descendant, and I need to disclaim at the beginning, I'm one of the non-lawyers on this call, and I do enjoy working with lawyers, learning the ins and outs of the legal framework. So for context, I wanted to just provide the viewers and everyone some context around the Indigenous Art Code's work. We are a national organisation, a very small team. We work nationally from the Torres Strait right down to Palawa Country, Tasmania, and across all states and territories. We're responsible for administering a voluntary industry code of conduct for art dealers and other entities who trade in or deal with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander artists and their art. We support artists. We always advocate for the artist and directly with issues or concerns about commercial dealings they have entered into or considering entering into. We facilitate transparent communication between artist members and businesses, providing advice and, when required, referrals to other support organisations. We work closely with our other colleagues, Arts Law Centre of Australia, National Association for Visual Arts, and the Copyright Agency. Indigenous Art Code is not a legal service, but we are the beacon for artists to find their way to get that support whenever needed. Through our code signatory membership process, we have 3 tiers, as you can see there on the map. Code supporters, code signatories. My focus is with individual artists. Quite often, individual artists don't have support if they sit outside of an art centre. Within Australia, there are approximately 80 art centres in remote and regional locations. Those particular art centres play a crucial role in facilitating not only the art for the art market, but all the traditional knowledge and traditional cultural expressions that comes through that centre, guided by senior elders, and transferring the knowledge through. One aspect is the art making with younger generation. If we could just go to the next slide, please. I wanted to provide 2 small insights into the Indigenous cultural intellectual property videos that we are creating, and we will be adding more to the website. Each one, I've got one at the beginning and one at the end, a little 1-minute snippet. I wanted to provide, I guess, the human voice and the voice of the people that we work really closely with. And in contrast of the AI world that isn't really able to provide that tangible generational transfer of knowledge. Would you mind please playing the video?
My name is Andrew Warnimilil. I am a Kanabu clan from Ngalindi.
My name is Peter Gambong. My homeland is southwest of Buckingham Bay, and my clan is Kupapingo. My old man said to me, it's your time to learn all the culture, paintings, songline of our estate, Kiliwiri. You can't imagine how we learn from our old people, right?
Yeah, it's all coming from our songlines.
It's all ceremony. You can't do the painting without a ceremony, without a songline. And the art is something that we own.
Yes.
That was our value, that was our riches. It's all here.
This is our scripture.
Thank you. So essentially, traditional knowledge and traditional cultural expressions are not simply collections of information that can be treated like ordinary data. In Australia, they form part of Indigenous cultural and intellectual property, and the term ICIP is slowly being a language that we're sharing with community and how we navigate the Western system and traditional law. This can include knowledge, practices, stories, language, art, designs, music, ceremonies, ecological knowledge, and cultural heritage passed down through generations. The emergence of AI raises a new question. what happens when culturally significant knowledge becomes data that can be collected, stored, analysed, and reproduced by machines. If you could please go to the next slide. So within my work as a artist membership coordinator, we have incorporated, when I say we, the Indigenous Art Code, the board, and a group of experts came together approximately a year ago and they incorporated ICIP within the membership. While we are encouraging artists to sign up through this free membership and support, we will give any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander artists support wherever needed, regardless of membership. We just want to make sure that they are visible in ensuring that fair and ethical, transparent deal that they might be encountering for the first time. And we ask artists when they go through the membership that they are declaring they aren't infringing on another artist's copyright. We also ask artists not to infringe on the ICIP belonging to any other artist or community. For context, within Australia, we've got over 250 different distinct language groups, and the cultural protocols that sit in each of those communities can differ. The cultural authority that you saw within the video that we just showed is strictly held within that place and with those people. So the declaration, we understand it doesn't address all of the ICIP issues that an artist might face, but we've started that process. If you wouldn't mind going to the next slide. So these are some of the aspects that we've asked the artists to consider, that we can ensure that traditional and customary laws are respected. I want to just touch on just another issue that we're facing, not only within the AI framework, is also people newly identifying. So when I heard Linnell speak about the whakapapa and the genealogy, this is a really big aspect of my role, is understanding people's intentions when they want to sign up, and if they understand their lineage or their apical ancestors in some case. So we have got a lot of work to do, and we are on the ground with these conversations every day. Would you mind going to the next slide? So in 2025, we had the Productivity Commission submission. The Indigenous Art Code has been a long-term advocate for artists from government right down through into the community space. So we wanted to be really clear about the fact that ICIP is not protected by copyright. Some of the language that we are using within the community is communities are starting to form their own language to actually break down again across the community around how that legal system works. So as a non-lawyer, I've been at the table, yes, but I had to learn very quickly how to navigate that language and then reinterpret it back to the grassroots. AI already reproduces racial bias and derogatory stereotypes. And again, we are very aware of the UNDRIP, United Nations Declaration Rights of Indigenous People, and the free, prior, and informed consent is a familiar language on the ground that we can encourage people to reflect on when they're doing their legal agreements in the art making process. So the conventional intellectual property law generally focuses on that individual ownership, identifiable creators, limited periods of protection, and commercial rights. And traditional knowledge often works differently. It's collectively held rather than owned by one individual. It is intergenerational, as mentioned, transmitted across the generations. It's connected to community and country identity and cultural responsibility, subject to cultural protocols determining who can access, use, or share it. And again, as I noticed Tony also highlighted in his talk, this is sometimes the secret and restricted areas that are intended not for public use. And quite often, that's an area that the senior artists and elders of each community will ensure how artworks are produced and what aspects of the stories are put into the public arena. IP Australia recognises that existing IP laws can struggle to accommodate these characteristics. This means the question isn't simply who owns the copyright. It can instead be who has the cultural authority to decide whether this knowledge should be recorded, used, transformed, or shared at all. Next slide, please. So it is really clear from the code's perspective and from what we're hearing from communities that the copyright protections must not be eroded. AI makes the issue much more significant because AI systems depend on data. Traditional knowledge can potentially enter the AI systems through digitized archives, websites, museums, research databases, published books and recordings, language datasets, images and artworks and designs, and environmental and geographic datasets. Once the information becomes digital, it can be copied, aggregated, searched, analysed, and potentially incorporated into AI training or outputs at an enormous scale. This creates several risks. Firstly, the knowledge may be reused without the community's cultural protocols or consent. And the loss of context. AI can separate knowledge from country, language, relationships, and cultural authority. The misrepresentation is also that AI-generated outputs may reproduce stereotypes or produce culturally inaccurate interpretations. And AI could potentially reproduce or transform cultural styles, stories, images, or knowledge without meaningful consent, attribution, or benefit sharing. That seems to be something that's been a major issue, obviously, within the art space. Previous to the Productivity Commission on their submission that we've just sent it into, there was the fake art harms culture, which is also a major body of work around the reproduction of tourist products that weren't made by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. So AI can turn a problem of unauthorized access into a problem of automated reproduction at scale. So essentially, Indigenous peoples should be able to exercise the ownership and control over data sovereignty, including its creation, collection, access, analysis, management, and dissemination and reuse. Next slide, please. If the AI systems are trained on the Indigenous data, then Indigenous data sovereignty needs to influence the entire AI life cycle. The collection, the storage, the training, model development, deployment, outputs, and reuse. At every stage, we should be asking, was the data collected with appropriate consent? Who controls access? Where is the data stored? Can it be used to train AI? Can it be combined with other data sets? And who controls the resulting model or outputs? And who benefits economically? Australia already has some protection through copyright, trademarks, designs, confidential information, and other mechanisms. But these protections don't necessarily capture the collective and continuing nature of traditional knowledge. For example, copyright may protect a particular recorded artwork or song, but may not protect the underlying traditional knowledge, cultural practice, or customary rules governing its use. This is why Australia is pursuing a standalone legislation for First Nation traditional knowledge and traditional cultural expressions. There isn't anything in place yet, and the discussions are still ongoing. Next slide, please. So the AI debate therefore sits within a much larger question about whether Australia's legal frameworks adequately recognise Indigenous cultural rights and self-determination. A useful framework could be built around 5 principles: Indigenous governance, where the First Nations communities should have meaningful discussion around making power over their knowledge is used. Again, the free, prior and informed consent. Consent should occur before collection or use, not simply after an AI system has already been developed. And cultural protocols. Not everything that can be digitized should be accessible, searchable, or used for AI training. Attribution and benefit sharing, where knowledge contributes to commercial or technological value, communities should be recognized and able to benefit. Accountability and redress. There must be mechanisms to challenge inappropriate use, harmful outputs, and cultural misrepresentation. AIPPI Australia similarly recommends informed consent, permission, and ongoing engagement with traditional custodians when Indigenous knowledge is being used. Next slide, please. So I'm going to wrap it up with some of my own comments. And I wanted to do that because I am a practicing photographer and have worked extensively in collecting institutions. And I'm now doing my own body of work with my family on country, trying to capture important botanical and traditional sites and knowledge, and trying to preserve those digital assets as best they can in a domestic setting. If you could play the video, please. My name is Joanne Dreesens. I am a Koa descendant and Kuki-Yalaji descendant. So knowledge transfer is years of consistent attendance, support, even just listening. ICIP is a collective knowledge. It's a shared knowledge. The elders will let you know what they will share, and it might just be a tiny bit until the next, little bit, and you just can't expect it to just be given just because you've found out who you are. You have to earn it. Thank you. So I guess how can we put traditional knowledge safely into the AI systems? I know that we've spoken a lot about the negatives, but I have seen in practice in communities some really strong positives. And I know we spoke about that before we decided to do this webinar. And I've seen it transform and, as an example, put elders in a space and see country when they're not even mobile enough to walk or, leave their homes. So there's the accessibility of digital assets that can help retain knowledge and all those, amazing positive way, but it has to be managed by Indigenous people and uniquely with each different community group, because I cannot speak for another community, and cultural law is a strong part of that process too. So I just wanted to thank you for letting me share just a snippet into my world on the ground here in Australia, and I hope it has been of use for this discussion.
Thank you so much, Joanne. So wonderful to be immersed into the Australian Aboriginal art space, and also for sharing with us, your thoughts on data collection, data sovereignty, and the governance of all that data, and integrating it into systems that may not capture the true spirit and the secrets and the sacredness of some of that information. So we are watching the space of all these jurisdictions today: Australia, New Zealand, Africa, and with the developments there. Thank you so much for sharing these thoughts, members of the panel. I just wanted to say thank you to the participants today. I hope that you were able to learn a lot about some of the developments that are happening in these jurisdictions that were covered today, and also looking at the overall overarching move in this landscape with AI interfering and interjecting and inspiring the various aspects of our lives, and how we try and balance those against what is actually true to our own understanding of what needs to be protected. We don't have much time for the questions, but I've just had a look that most of the questions have already been answered. I just want to move very quickly before we end to say that if you are not registered for the AIPPI World Congress in Hamburg, Germany, it's on the from the 7th to the 10th, so please do join us. And on behalf of my committee, the standing committee meeting for AIPPI's IP and genetic resources and traditional knowledge, we're having a cafe, and our AIPPI cafe will be centered on AITK and the derivative knowledge dilemma. And it's all about how algorithms learn from culture. And there will be also, that will be on the 8th of October at 4 p.m. And the standing committee meeting will be on Friday the 9th at 8:30. So all are welcome. Please do join us in Hamburg. And I think that brings us to the end of our session. I believe some members of the panelists have already answered some of those questions. And with further ado, I would like to conclude today's session. But do contact us if you have any further questions that you'd like us to address. And we would be happy to do so. If we've missed any of them in the chat, we will get your email and respond to you in due course. So thank you very much, everyone. And we hope to see you very soon at our next webinar. We will be doing another one in next month under my committee's grouping. So we will be looking forward to seeing you there. A huge thank you for the members of the panel. Thank you so much for your time, for joining us today. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Karen. All the best. Bye.